What's up? I'm SYROBE, and today I want to cover my top 10 list of the most underrated DLC weapons from Elden Ring. My list aims to focus on the less talked about and less flashy weapons that are still equally worthy of praise. I'm only going to focus specifically PvE related stats for poise damage, also known as stance damage to some, status buildups, and overall weapon movesets. This list is also not in any specific order, just 10 amazing weapons that I wish people talked more about, because I spent over 14 hours testing every single DLC weapon so you don't have to. Big shout out to my live stream viewer community that pointed out a lot of unique weapon traits along the way. Let's start off with a really weird one that I'll bet most of you didn't know. The Lizard Greatsword is a new weapon for the Greatsword weapon class. It can be infused with Ashes of War, it can be buffed by spell weapon buffs, and it can use weapon greases. The highest stance damage for the Lizard Greatsword is 36.3 on its two-handed charge heavy attack, as long as both parts of its heavy attack hits their target. The heavy attack is the most insane part about this weapon. Both the regular heavy and the charged heavy shoot a projectile from the weapon, but that projectile also applies any status effect from the weapon. The ranged portion status buildup is almost exactly the same as whatever your weapon buildup is. Anything that you can infuse into your weapon via Ash of War like bleed, poison, or cold gets transferred to the ranged attack. So you can proc statuses like bleed from range at full weapon effectiveness and prevent the status from going down with just a quick tap of a heavy attack. The icing on the cake is that this weapon has 2 hitboxes on its charge attack, which means you're able to apply twice the normal status effects from your weapon. The 127 cold buildup is actually around 250 cold buildup for one charge attack, because both the melee portion hitbox and the ranged weapon hitbox applies frostbite, and an equal amount of it from each other. So if I charge attack in front of someone and ensure that both hitboxes land, it makes this one of the fastest greatswords to apply any status effect with. It also gains access to one of the most broken Ashes of War in the game, Carian Sovereignty. And to make it even sweeter, the Lizard Greatsword is in the Greatsword class, which means you get an ass load of hyper armor while using Carian Sovereignty, which you can't get with many other weapons. This means that you'll be able to have one of the best Ashes of War in the game with hyper armor, so it's really hard for anyone to cancel you out of it, instantly poise break most enemies, and apply over 200 status effect buildup in one charge heavy. And again, you can proc statuses from range. This makes this weapon extremely worthy of its praise, and I highly recommend you all use this weapon. Through my testing, the range attack won't gain any statuses from Blood Flame, Black Flame, or Frozen Armament. Seems like the ranged portion only gains whatever is already affixed to the weapon via its Ash of War. Again, like bleed, poison, or frostbite. But regardless, this is still an amazing weapon and is one of my personal favorites from the DLC. This new consumable, Sacred Bloody Flesh. You can farm these off Blood Fiends, and it gives you around a 10% damage buff when consumed, and another 20% when blood loss is nearby. This stacks with Lord of Blood and White Mask for an approximate 70% damage increase with blood loss. This is going to change bleed builds as we know it forever, and especially so with the Blacksteel Twin Blades. The Blacksteel Twin Blade is a new weapon for the Twin Blade weapon class. It can be infused with Ashes of War, it can be buffed by spell weapon buffs, and it can use weapon greases. The Blacksteel Twin Blade's highest poise damage is 33 poise damage for a 2-hand charge heavy attack, as long as all 4 of your hits from this 2-handed charge heavy attack meet your target, which is extremely important for the next portion of this weapon. This new Twin Blade seems pretty basic upon first glance, but the best way to describe it is if the Godskin Peeler and the Gargoyle Twin Blade fuse together into one beautiful twin blade. In reality, the Blacksteel Twin Blade can achieve the highest total attack power out of any twin blade that can have its Ash of War changed. With Flame Art scaling, this weapon surpasses the Gargoyle Twin Blade in base damage, and this Twin Blade also shares the exact same running attack as the Godskin Peeler, which the regular Gargoyle Twin Blade does not. It can also have its Ash of War changed to whatever you're allowed to put on it. This allows you to add bleed buildup and even seppuku to the Blacksteel Twin Blade, and with its unique running attack, it will almost instantly proc bleed on targets with over 350 bleed buildup in a single 2-hand running charge attack. Don't worry, the Twin Blade still has the standard jumping attack combo that most Twin Blade users love when power stancing, which is still just as effective. This is by far the best of both worlds and is likely top 3 if not the best Twin Blade for any Twin Blade users to own. The Carian Thrusting Shield is a new weapon for the new Thrusting Shield weapon class. It can be infused with Ashes of War, it can be buffed by spell weapon buffs, and it can even use weapon greases on a shield. This might be one of the best weapons in the game. It's like shield poking on steroids. With the Carian Thrusting Shield, you can easily get over 600 base damage. This piqued my interest after seeing Scott Junn's video, so I wanted to add my own tweaks to it. You can actually guard counter an attack with this shield while blocking, and that deals 36 poise damage, which is actually insane for stance breaking bosses, considering that you can always keep up your block and take no damage for free guard counters after. This lets you easily break a boss's stance, and despite being a shield, this thrusting shield also allows you to get a riposte with the same shield weapon. Just make sure that you equip your thrusting shield in your left hand armament slot, because the shield can only be buffed in your left hand slot. You can use any sorcery staff or sacred seal to cast the spells with on your right hand, which can be used for any buffs. And with that, it'll allow you to take literally no damage. On top of that, allowing you to attack while blocking and ignoring all bosses' damage. This shield is nasty because despite it being strong, there are still some attacks that you have to dodge. Bosses that have sweeping attacks can clip you from the sides or behind, which cause you to take damage despite blocking, while some larger attacks will flatten you. Luckily, at least in PvE, there are not a whole lot of attacks that can do that, so most of the time you can just get away with holding block up and spamming the attack at the same time. There is also one specific talisman that is key to this build's success. The Carian Thrusting Shield is only really good at blocking physical attack damage, but anything elemental will shred right through it. That's why you must use this Pearl Shield Talisman, which boosts all non-physical damage negation, so that will completely cover your elemental weaknesses. In addition, we can also include spells like Scholar Shield to give us a ton of extra magic defense while blocking, and this spell also reduces stamina consumption so that we may continuously block and attack without having our poise broken. And with a little bit of an investment into faith, we can cast Protection of the Erdtree, which increases all extra elemental resistances by 30%. So you quite literally become a walking tank with this build. It can actually be tricky to use, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually laughable how much it trivializes most boss fights. The Flowerstone Gavel is a new weapon for the regular hammer weapon class. It cannot be infused with Ashes of War, it cannot be buffed by spell weapon buffs, and it cannot use weapon greases. But its Ash of War has a decently long range, and the bolt seems to deal bonus damage if it hits an enemy on their head. And whenever you strike someone with the Ash of War, it reduces specifically their lightning defensive stats by around 10%. Additionally, it deals bonus damage to dragon type enemies. But the Ash of War cannot be boosted by either dragon form, unfortunately, though the Priest Heart and the Rock Heart will not increase your damage through my testing. The melee weapon's highest poise damage is actually on its two-handed charge heavy attack for 39.65 poise damage to break a boss's stance with. This means that this weapon has a large amount of poise damage on its charge attack and has an amazing Ash of War. The Ash of War deals lightning damage, but its lightning damage only seems to scale on Arcane. I maxed out Dex and Strength and nothing changed. The only time I saw the Ash of War base damage go up was when I maxed out Arcane. So in short, this weapon is ideal for builds where you already invest a lot into your Arcane stat, and pairs best for builds that utilize Dragon Communion incantation, because some of those spells actually require 49 Arcane. I don't think this weapon is something you should go completely out of your way to spec for, but it's definitely a nice piece to have for anyone that wants to build an Arcane build without centering it around status effects like Bleed. The Spread Crossbow is a new weapon for the Crossbow weapon class. It cannot be infused with Ashes of War, it cannot be buffed by spell weapon buffs, and it cannot use weapon greases. I am a spread crossbow salesman, so please allow me to share my enjoyment with you. As you all may know, crossbows in general do not scale with any stats that you have. It can be buffed by talisman and other general spells, but they cannot be directly increased by any of your player attributes. This means that typically the best usage for crossbows is to apply status effects. I know everyone was hyped over the rapid fire machine gun crossbow, officially named the repeating crossbow, but honestly, after using the spread crossbow, I can never go back. Feels like I'm living the Doomslayer's dream in Elden Ring to rip and tear with my spread crossbow bolts, instantly proccing statuses like Bleed and Frostbite in 2 shots. Each shot from this weapon shoots multiple projectiles at once, and it feels like a rhythm game when you have to roll, reload, roll, shoot, roll, reload, roll, shoot, status proc. It's super addicting to use and fits the fast-paced DLC boss design philosophy where most bosses will literally jump you as soon as you step foot through the door. The benefit of the spread crossbow over the repeating crossbow is that it has no FP cost, and it loads multiple crossbow bolts into a single shot. The repeating crossbow has a long cast time and consumes a lot of FP. At least when it comes to the spread crossbow, you can infinitely spam it for boss status procs, as long as you have the right bolts for the occasion. Super fun and easy to use, and is now my personal favorite crossbow. Okay, first off, uncyphers your Pata. The regular Pata is a new weapon for the regular fist weapon class. It can be infused with Ashes of War, it can be buffed by spell weapon buffs, and it can use weapon greases. This weapon gains the moveset of fist weapons with the reach of thrusting swords. It deals standard and pierce damage. I love using these Patas because they're extremely fast and fun. Typically, the one thing I hate about using Starfists is that despite the Starfist being god tier, they lack range and their charge attacks can end up missing quite often. The Pata's highest poise damage is 33 after a a guard counter as long as both attacks land. However, jumping heavy attacks can deal 24 poise damage, so I think jumping attacks might be more consistent. As I just mentioned, I love the jumping attacks for poise damage, but the regular patas have extremely long range, which really makes its running attacks feel satisfying. They take a lot of practice to get used to, but typically I found running attacks and jumping attacks to be the most effective in terms of DPS, as this weapon truly excels when applying status effects rapidly, whether through weapon greases, ashes of war, or spells, for status affinities like cold or bleed, poison, and even black flame. The patas are a very fun but difficult weapon to use, so I would largely recommend this weapon for people looking for a challenge in PvE. The Messmer Soldier Axe is a new weapon for the regular axe weapon class. It can be infused with Ashes of War, it can be buffed by spell weapon buffs, and it can use weapon greases. The Messmer Soldier Axe might look like a common axe that most people will skip over, but it has some very unique traits towards its counterpart, the Warped Axe. Most axe enjoyers will probably tell you that their favorite axe is the Warped Axe. So fun fact, the Messmer Soldier Axe gets pretty much the exact same motion values and stance damage for almost every attack. The Warped Axe and the Messmer Soldier Axe are nearly identical in these values. The Messmer Soldier Axe highest poise damage is 33 poise damage, which is the same as the Warped Axe. However, when it comes to charge attacks, the motion values for the Messmer Soldier Axe are higher, thanks to its hidden passive. The Messmer Soldier Axe weapon has a passive buff specific to charge attacks, which will allow it to deal more damage than the Warped Axe, despite the Warped Axe having a higher total AR. I think the Warped Axe having a higher total AR will still keep it as one of the best axes to use, but the fact that the Messmer Soldier Axe can have less total base damage and still output more damage than the Warped Axe on its charge heavy attack makes it worthy of this list. The Smith Script CIRQUE is a new weapon for the new backhand blade weapon class. It can be infused with Ashes of War, but it cannot be buffed by spell weapon buffs, and it cannot use weapon greases. I've seen a lot of people overhyping the regular backhand blades without realizing that the Smith Script CIRQUE is also a backhand blade weapon that can actually achieve a higher total attack power than the regular backhand blades. I believe the regular backhand blades are a little bit more efficient when it comes to bleed builds and stance breaking, since the CIRQUE gets less base damage when you put bleed on it, and the CIRQUE also has very little stance damage. But if you are looking for something that isn't a bleed build and still uses the backhand blades, the CIRQUE is your best option because they also get access to some of the most OP Ashes of War, currently being Swift Strike and Blind Spot. I will admit that the range on the charge attack is actually very poor, and it feels like it deserves a little bit of a buff to increase its effective range, but the base damage easily hits for over 1000 damage on a single charge attack without any buffs at level 150. So I truly believe that these are in fact underrated when it comes to raw damage, but it might not be the best for status buildup nor stance breaking. Despite all of that, they're extremely fun to use and are worthy of being on this list. The Barbed Staff Spear is a new weapon for the Great Spear weapon class. It cannot be infused with Ashes of War, it cannot be buffed by spell weapon buffs, and it cannot use weapon greases. Now look, this channel is very biased against holy weapons. I despise them, but the Barbed Staff Spear got me. It's one of my favorite holy damage weapons introduced in the DLC. It scales extremely well on Faith, with an A tier scaling, increasing its primary holy damage stat, and for its highest poise damage, it deals 36 poise damage for a single two-hand charge heavy attack. The Barbed Staff Spear is also one of the very few holy damage weapons to receive innate build bleed without being able to change its Ash of War. Speaking of weapon arts, this weapon's Ash of War is a little gimmicky. It shoots out a wide spread of golden arcs, but what most people don't know is that the range portion of this Ash of War still builds up bleed, so you can close distance and get off big poise breaking charge attacks to break through boss stances with some free bleed buildup on the attack, and from a moderate distance you can actually keep building up bleed with its Ash of War. I will say, in all honesty, the Ash of War isn't super effective at proccing bleed because it spreads out so far, but if you are able to get really close and shotgun each arc into the enemy, the full duration of the Ash of War can easily build up an average of 200 bleed buildup just by itself. So for a holy damage weapon, it has some heavy hitting charge attacks, innate bleed buildup on hit, and a ranged bleed Ash of War that makes it definitely stand out from the rest of the holy weapons, earning a spot on my list. The Deathknights Long Axe is a new weapon for the Great Axe weapon class. It cannot be infused with Ashes of War, it cannot be buffed by spell weapon buffs, and it cannot use weapon greases. The highest poise damage for this weapon is on its two-hand charge heavy attack with 36.3 poise damage. The weapon itself is a bit odd, as it deals lightning damage but does not scale with dex. Instead it scales with primarily strength. It is in the top 5 longest of the Great Axes category with a very unique Ash of War. I love this Ash of War because it deals a decent amount of poise damage and has high base damage, all while giving you literal iframes, making you invincible from most attacks and allowing you to get this attack off a majority of the time without getting interrupted. This Ash Ash of War is extremely powerful because when you use it, you do a flash step with iframes, and you can choose to roll out of it after or follow up with a heavy attack to go in the air and deal bonus damage, as well as an approximate 32 poise damage to break enemy boss stances with. In addition to the iframes that the Ash of War gives you and the hefty poise damage you get from it, you also gain an insane amount of hyper armor, meaning that in the off chance you do take damage after the iframes, it's very unlikely that your attack will get interrupted. I prefer these over the twin axes, which have a similar Ash of War, because I found myself getting cancelled a lot more using the twin axes, but I never noticed the long haft axe Ash of War ever getting cancelled. The only time I didn't dodge an attack was when I used the Ash of War too late and it didn't even go off. As soon as this Ash of War goes off, you're most likely dodging any attack. And even if you don't, you have the hyper armor to back you up and follow through. This has been my personal top 10 underrated weapons list for Elden Ring's DLC. I'll be making a full list of every single DLC weapon ranked very soon, so please be on the lookout for that on my YouTube channel, and leave a like and subscribe if you haven't yet to know when I go live on my next YouTube live stream. Come watch me live on YouTube and join the community. I've been SYROBE, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.